Good day, everyone. My name is Regine Candido from Section B, and now we will tackle about the lessons in Module 1, and these are the content, the global view on prison administration, prison antiquity to modernity, the influence of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope John Paul II, the pro-life Pope, Walnut Street Jail, King Henry VIII, and King Edward VI, a jewel of King Henry VII. So let's start with the global view on prison administration. So in the year 2018, the Philippines held the sixth highest prison population out of 21 Asian countries. As of 2019, the Philippines' population rested at 108.31 million people, and 215,000 of those people were incarcerated. Therefore, the Philippines has an incarceration rate of about 200 per 100,000 citizens. So, there are 933 prisons running in the Philippines. Unfortunately, they are mismanaged and overcrowded. So, there is five facts about the Philippines incarceration system. The first one is severe overcrowding. So, Rodrigo Duterte won the presidential election in 2016. He promised to end the crime within 6 months. This promise also included the killing of tens of thousands of criminals. Duterte's election has an influence to the famous war on drugs and eventually overcrowded prisons. Manila City Jail, the largest jail in the Philippines, is split into dorms that roughly houses 170 inmates. Currently, these dorms house around 500 people. Similarly, a room designated for 30 people holds about 130 in the Quezon City Jail. This severe crowding in prisons led to illness and death tolls in the thousands. So that is the reason why it leads to illness and death tolls in the thousands because of severe overcrowding. According to the World Prison Brief, 75.1% of incarceration within the Philippine incarceration system are pre-trial. In 2018, 141,422 of 188,278 prisoners were pre-trial detainees. Unfortunately, many people are serving sentences without conviction. Pro-trial detention is found in judicial systems all over the world. In countries like the Philippines, people may serve time that outweighs their crimes. On average, prisoners in the Philippines are detained for 9 months without being sentenced. Next is high death tolls. About 5,200 inmates die annually at the New Bilibid prison. So let's just try to imagine that every year there were 5,200 inmates die in the Bilibid prison in the Manila City Jail. According to Ernesto Tamayo, the hospital medical chief, their deaths are due to overcrowding, dirty living conditions, and inmate violence. At a 2019 Philippines Senate hearing, Tamayo said that there were uncontrollable outbreaks of pulmonary tuberculosis. In addition to overcrowding, poor living conditions, and inmate violence, NBP lacks nutritional food and basic health care. On account of these living conditions, Tamayo reports that at least one prisoner dies at NBP each day. Thankfully, politicians and prisons employees are working to reduce overcrowding in the Philippines prison. Human rights advocates have also called for the release of vulnerable inmates, hoping to protect them from poor living conditions. Next is vigilante justice. Duterte's war on drugs escalated during his presidency. Jobless citizens were recruited to kill anyone suspected of dealing, buying, or using drugs. This was one of few ways for some people to make money, which is true. Many homeless and impoverished people joined the vigilante teams. In 2016, Duterte told the public, "If you know of any addicts, go ahead and kill them yourself." Together, the Philippines police force and identified gunmen have killed 7,000 known drug dealers and users since Duterte's presidency in 2016. The Philippines' war on drugs has created the belief that extrajudicial violence and murder are necessary to fight crime. But the Human Rights Watch has turned the narrative to fight crime around Duterte. They are publicizing information about the vigilante justice in the Philippines. So, vigilante justice is where there are a paid men who will be able to capture a certain dealers or buyers who are using drugs. So that was Duterte's law or words to be Duterte's law. Next is corruption. In August 2018, the public learned a former mayor may have been released from prison for good behavior. He was originally charged for rape and homicide in 1993. Similar stories of corruption in the Philippines prison continued to emerge. In September 2018, the public learned that a woman was told her husband's sentence would be shortened if she paid 50,000 pesos. Later that year, senators stated that inmates could live like kings for a fee. So let's just try to imagine that when you are wealthy enough, you will be like you're like at home when you're in prison. This information led to further allegations. Prison workers and officials were taking bribes to bring and distribute contraband to inmates. The contraband in question included cigarettes, cell phones, and televisions. So in prison, they are not allowed to use cell phones, using cigarettes, and also watching television. Supposedly, inmates can also pay for personal cooks and nurses. How nice it was! Inmates who cannot afford a better life within the prison are stuck in overcrowded and dirty rooms. That is the reason why there are people who is prone to diseases because of overcrowded and dirty living conditions. These inmates have a higher rate of becoming ill and of death. Now that the corruption has been unearthed, officials are taking steps to weed it out, one prison at a time. Prison administration fundamentally involves the application of both leadership and management techniques to correctional institutions. Every year, Global Prison Runs by Pencil Reform International in collaboration with the Thailand Institute of Justice provides us with a global view on the state of prisons. And every year, this report is unfortunately hardly a surprise we read about the degrading conditions in which people are imprisoned and about their growing number. Yet the level of crime in most societies is constantly decreasing. The question that remains unanswered, therefore, is why our societies focus the response to unlawful behavior so often in prison. Where is the proportionality in sentencing when we punish nonviolent offenses with lengthy prison sentences? Is this the only response we can offer? The chapter on drugs and imprisonment in this report highlights that a high number of prisons in the world are overcrowded due to the incarceration of people for drug-related offenses, in particular nonviolent offenses involving use and possession for personal use. This directly reflects our contemporary addiction to punishment and showcase the disproportionality punishment in relation to the offense. The use of harsh prison sentences for people who use drugs or for those who play a minor role in the drug trade also shows the inefficiency, limitations, and perverse effects of current drug control policies. Not only are punishment and incarceration becoming the sole instrument used to enforce the law, but also they are serving to implement moral norms which have no link with the reality of the offense that they are supposed to punish. This trend of over-incarceration and punishment of people who use drugs is seen on every continent. The deep impact it has on prison system and on people in prison and their communities has sparked the current global debate on drug policy reform. In recent years, more and more countries have been introducing amendments to their drug laws, for example by decriminalizing the use of drugs in Norway and Colombia, and by replacing prison terms with monetary fines in Ghana and Tunisia, or with community service as envisaged in Senegal. These changes are reforms being discussed and implemented in the global environment that remains highly stigmatizing, where drugs are still considered evil and prohibition approaches prevail. They are therefore born out of real need, the need for societies to stop exposing their citizens to greater risk from arrest related to drug use than come from the act of using drugs. The need for reforms was also highlighted at the UN General Assembly Special Session on Drugs held in 2016. In their decisions, their members stated called for more proportionate sentencing and for alternatives to incarceration. At the Global Commission on Drug Policy, we call for these commitments to be implemented, taking account of the fact that over-incarceration as a result of out-of-date drug policies stalls progress on implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Notably, for Goal 3 on health, Goal 5 on gender equality, Goal 10 on reducing inequality, and Goal 16 on peaceful societies. Drug policies needs reforms, and there are two urgent ones to act. First is, we need to accept that behaviors and actions of others that are not aligned with Our own moral perspectives do not need to be turned into criminal offenses. And the second one is we need to introduce proportionate sentencing and alternatives to imprisonment for minor drug supply related offenses. According to UN Nelson Mandela's rules, to play a rehabilitative role and focus on social social reintegration and distance from the criminal justice system those who should not be subject to it, including people who use drugs. Next will be prison antiquity to modernity. The first millions of prison was in the first millennia BC that was located in the area of mighty ancient civilization of Mesopotamia and Egypt. During those times, prisons were almost always stationed in the underground dungeons where guilty or suspected criminals spent their life either awaiting death, sentence, or a command to become slaves, often working as galley slaves. Exception from that rule comes from the home of modern democracy in Greece. There, prisoners were held in the poorly isolated buildings where they could often be visited by their friends and families. Primary source of their detention were not dungeons, high walls or bars, but simple wooden blocks that were attached to their feet. Ancient Roman Empire, however, continued to use harsher methods of punishment, they mean. Their prisons were built almost exclusively underground, with tight and catastrophic passageway and cells. Prisoners themselves were held either in simple cells or cheated to the walls for life or for a time. As slavery was accepted norm in those days, majority of prisoners that were not sentenced to death were sold of slaves or used by the Roman government as gladiator. So, what is gladiator? A man in ancient Rome who fought against another man or criminal for public entertainment. So there they called it as a gladiator, which it fought against another man or an animal, just like in the movie. So next, the conditions in the arena European prisoners remained harsh until English royalty started being more involved with their justice system. So it is Henry commissioned the construction of first prison in 1166 together with the first draft of English legal system that used concept of jury. One of the most historic prison legislations was introduced in 2015. So one of the most historic prison legislations was introduced in 2015 when King John signed Magna Carta, which stated that no man could be imprisoned without trial. So at this time, King John signed Magna Carta, which stated that which entails that this law is that there would be no prisoner when it was not stated in it was not he or she was not being in trial. Next is during the end of 20th century, modern prison system was finalized. Concept of probation services was introduced in 1991. As of 2006, it is estimated that over 9 million people are imprisoned worldwide, with the United States leading in the rate of incarceration in 743 per 100,000 people. So next is all about the influence of the Roman Catholic Church. The influence of religion and morality on criminal justice has been of major importance throughout history. So, morality is society's set of accepted rules and norms of behavior. Morality is commonly part of religious belief. A primary rule of religion is to exert control over its followers by setting and promoting rules and customs for people to follow. So, the rule of morality is to teach us what is right and from wrong. And also the rule of religion um, is to exert in controlling us to commit sins and to commit crimes also. So, the role of religion in defining crimes in America's colonial society of the 17th and 18th century was clear. Key crimes included blasphemy. Blasphemy is showing a lack of reference towards God, and sexual deviance and heresy, or holding a belief that conflicts with church doctrine. Next is early punishment, focus on shame, guilt as ways of bringing those who stayed back into the fold. So these shame and guilt were supposed to make the offender apologize, ask forgiveness, and live a better life. Earlier yet in the Old World, execution was the favored means of punishing those who broke society's rules. The rule of prison chaplains, a reverend, priest, or rabbis in the late. So, during the medieval times, the Roman Catholic Church introduced incarceration or confinement in prison as an alternative to death. The idea spread as Protestants in Northern Europe established corrections facilities in the late 16th century. 15th century was primarily to help those condemned to death repent their sins, and during medieval times, the Roman Catholic Church introduced incarceration as an alternative to death. The idea spread as Protestants in Northern Europe established corrections facilities in the late 16th century. The Catholics under Pope Clement XI built the Michael Prison in 1703 for youthful offenders, separating them from adults and providing work for rehabilitation. With the expansion of prison in Britain in the early 18th century, Britain had assigned chaplains to all prisons by 1733. So it was the time where it was common today that every jail has its chaplains for the reason that the prisoners will live their lives and be a little bit closer to God. Next is, how influential was the Roman Catholic Church? So, the Roman Catholic Church is the largest group of Christians in the world. There are about 1 billion members, mostly in Europe, North and South America. The church goes back to about 30 after death to the life of Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that he rose to heaven after being crucified. So they believe, the Christians believe that word, which is God will be rose again after being crucified, which is, for me, it's true. And also, they believe that Jesus brought salvation to all people on earth. So the leader of the Roman Catholic Church and successor of Jesus Christ on earth is the Pope. So the Pope governs the Church from the Vatican, a small state situated in the heart of Rome. The Pope selects cardinals and bishops. So the Pope will select a cardinals and bishop to lead the church throughout the world. So these are the examples of the bishops and how they dress. Next is, the Roman Catholic Church has influenced history more than any other organization. It exercised its power throughout the Middle Ages. Then, missionaries traveled to other continents to spread Catholicism. Great architects created churches and cathedrals. Artists drew paintings and made frescoes that Catholics believe in and recite in a mass. During the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church was the most powerful organization in Western Europe. It's not only had religious power but also gained more and more political power. Popes launched crusades to conquer back the Holy Land from Muslims. Kings and leaders in the West were very often in direct conflict with the Pope and his bishops. In the 14th century, cardinals elected a French Pope who did not want to go to Rome. For about 70 years, there were two popes who fought for power, one in Avignon and one in Rome. As the Roman Catholic became weaker, people began to work to break away and form new Christian churches. That is why there are plenty of religions that are existing in this generation because of the Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic becomes weaker. And what role has religion played in the development of corrections in the past? Throughout the long history of correction, religious persons and religious institutions have greatly influenced treatment of offenders. For centuries, churches were among the first institutions to provide asylum for accused criminals. The actual establishment of prisons and penitentiaries was a religious idea that allowed the offender to obtain penance for his crimes, make amends, and convert while being isolated from others. So, it was the religious idea that makes a person penance for his crimes, make amends, and convert while being isolated from others. So that is why some prisoners who are out in jail, they became more obedient and they also became religious because of the religious teachings inside the jail. Next is the actual establishment of prisons and penitentiaries was a religious idea. So it was a religious idea. but probably the most significant influence was the establishment of early regular chaplaincy. Correctional chaplains were among the earliest paid non-custodial staff and were the first to provide education and counseling for inmates. Currently, many correctional inmates practice their religion on an individual basis or within the structure of an organized religious program. Religious programs are commonplace in jails and prisons, and research indicates that 1 in 3 inmates participates in some religious program during their incarceration. Next is the influence and practice of religion in the correctional setting is as old as the history of prison. Initial entry of religion into prison was probably carried out by religious men who themselves were imprisoned. Next is imprisonment under church jurisdiction became a substitute for a corporal or capital punishment. In medieval times, the Roman Catholic Church developed penal techniques later used by secular states such as the monastic cell. So this is the monastic cell that served as a punishment place for criminal offenders. So this is how it looked like. This is the monastic cell. Next, we will move to the history of Pope John Paul II, the pro-life pope. So Saint John Paul or Johannes Paulus was born in Wadowice, Poland. He was born on May 18, 1920 and died on April 12, 2005 in Vatican City. Part of Pope John Paul's effort is to promote greater understanding between nations and between religions. He undertook numerous trips abroad, traveling for greater distances than had all other popes combined, and he extended his influence beyond the church by campaigning against political oppression and criticizing the materialism of the West. So, one of the Pope's goal is to promote greater understanding between nations and between religions. So, on May, it happened on May 13, 1981. Pope John Paul was crossing St. Peter's Square in Vatican City when an attempt was made on his life. So, Pope John Paul was shot by a gunman. I don't know why. Why is it the reason that gunman trying to kill the Pope? So, let's figure out. Next is, so that gunman was already identified. His name was Mehmet Ali Aga, who has escaped from a Turkish prison after receiving a life sentence for murdering a journalist. Fired 4 shots with a 4mm pistol. So, Mehmet Ali Aga is an individual who had escaped from a Turkish prison. So, after receiving a life sentence for murdering a journalist, so he was a killer who escaped from a prison or in jail. So, at this point, 2 stuck the Pope in his lower intestine, 1 in his right arm and 1 in his left index finger. So, thankfully, the Pope was only shot in his lower intestine and also the other part is in his left index finger. And there were also 2 bystanders were also wounded at that time at the shooting incident of the Pope. So, despite of severe blood loss, the Pope survived. Thankfully, the Pope survived and asked for all Catholics to pray for Agca, whom he had sincerely forgiven. So imagine when someone do you think I do you think that if someone shoot you and makes your life into critical way, do you think that you will forgive the person who shoot you? It's unforgivable, right? You want also justice. If someone shoot you and it makes you critical, it could lead you to die in that particular situation. So Pope John Paul is sincerely forgive the person who shot him. So next is violence and forgiveness. In 1983, John Paul visited his would-be assassin, so he called Agca as his assassin. They had a private conversation. The Pope stayed in touch with Agca's family during the latter's incarceration and in 2000 requested that he be pardoned. So, the request was granted. Agca was released and deported to Turkey, where he was imprisoned for the life sentence he had fled decades prior. He converted to Christianity while incarcerated and was finally released in 2010. So while Agca was imprisoned, he was converted into Christianity. So he changed his religion into Christianity and was finally he was released in prison in 2010. In December 2014, he returned to Rome and laid 24 white roses at the Pope's tomb. So in 2014, the Pope has already died, and also for Agca's gratitude, he laid 24 white roses at the Pope's tomb. In Pope John Paul II's homily that includes the Bible verses for prisoners, each states that I was in prison and you came to me. Just like an example, what Pope John Paul did while Agca was in prison at the time that he was successfully survived in his situation. Next is so in that quotation with that I was in prison and you came to me, he is asking to be found in you and so many other people touched by various forms of human suffering. So no matter what a person committed a crime, we should also visit them, for they are still a person. They are still person who commits a crime, and we all knew that all of us are not perfect. We every day we can commit mistakes, and we should also ask forgiveness to God for that mistakes. Next is, as you did it to one of the least of those my brethren, you did it to me. Which means that whatever we do, there will be an impact to ourselves, that we should also know the consequences that will possibly happen when we do something bad. And the next is Walnut Street Jail. The Walnut Street Jail. This is the second to the last topic that we will tackle for this day. So, Walnut Street Jail was a jail and penitentiary house in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from 1773 to 1838. Legislation calling for establishment of the jail was passed in 1773 to relieve overcrowding in the High Street Jail. The first prisoners was admitted in 1776. It was located at 6th and Walnut Streets, where it acquired its original name, Walnut Street Jail. So, the penitentiary house built in 1790, it is considered to be the first in the United States, as it was built to use individual cells and work details. So the word penitentiary came from the Pennsylvania Quakers' belief in penitence and self-examination as a means to salvation. So this was made a new permanent form of combating crime through the practice of solitary confinement, which was later adopted at the Eastern State Penitentiary. So the jail was designed to hold groups of inmates in large rooms. It was designed by Robert Smith. So, Robert Smith was a prominent Philadelphian architect who designed the said jail. The building was in the typical U shape, designed to hold large numbers of inmates. There was a little regard for their physical well-being and more for their rehabilitation. The prison was overcrowded and dirty, and inmates attacked each other regularly. A new cell block called Penitentiary House was added in 1790. Built with the courtyard of the existing structure, it included a series of small cells for individual prisoners. The cells and the corridors connecting them were arranged to prevent prisoners from communicating with each other. And also, windows were high up. The cell had 9 foot high, 2.7 meters, ceilings and covered to prevent prisoners looking onto the street. Also, each cell had a mattress, a water tap, and a private pipe. So, in their jail, they already provide mattress, a water tap, and a private pipe. Why did the Walnut Street Jail fail? So what is the reason why that Walnut Street Jail failed? The Walnut Street Jail was to be converted to penitentiary in 1790, but because of political reasons and the resistance of the jailer John Reynolds, the transformation did not occur till 1795. Yes, it's true, because like for example, in today's generation, there are some politicians that are known to corruption, and example of that is in building or in making this Walnut Street Jail. That's the reason why it fails, because of political reasons. Next is, what was the first jail in America? Of course, the Walnut Street Jail prison was established in 1773 and considered to be the first prison in America, and was soon followed by Newgate in New York in 1797. So, Walnut Street Prison is the first jail in America, and I don't know today that in the picture it is um, newly built um, newly built department or infrastructure. And next is, let's talk about the next established jail, which is the Newgate in New York in 1797. This was established as a result of efforts by such social reformers, Thomas Eddy, to make the criminal justice system of their day more humane. Instead of death sentences or crippling corporal punishment, they substituted lengthy prison sentences. So, in that time, they didn't do corporal punishment. They just substitute it into lengthy prison sentences, meaning to say that the prisoner will be in prison in a long period of time. Next is, let's talk about King Henry VIII. Bridewell Palace in London was built as a residence of King Henry VIII and was one of his homes early in his reign for 8 years. So, a Bridewell Palace is a residence of King Henry VIII. So, King Henry VIII is a wealthy person. King Henry was the King of England from 1509 until his death in 1557. He is known for his 6 marriages, and in particular his efforts to have his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon, which they are being annulled. Giving to the City of London Corporation by his son King Edward VI for use as an orphanage and place of correction for wayward women. So King Edward VI was the King of England and Ireland from 28th on January 1547 until his death in 1553. He was crowned at the age of 20. So the same on our age today. He was already crowned as a king in their land. So imagine, in that young age, are you able to manage or to lead the people in their country? For me, in my side, I think I can't manage to be responsible enough in dealing with the people in that certain country, because the capacity of my ability the ability of mine is not it's not good enough. So he was crowned on 20 February at the age of 9. So at the age of 9, he was crowned as a king of their land. It was not 20, rather. It was 9. It was 9 that King Edward VI was crowned as a king of England. So Edward was the son of Henry VII and Jane Seymour, and he was the first monarch to be raised as Protestant. Next is, during his reign, the realm was governed by a regency council because he never reached maturity. So imagine, at that young age, do you think you are mature enough to govern, to become a leader? All I know is, at the age of 9, some of the children are busy on playing games, and that child is governed to be a responsible leader in their land. So next is Bridewell later became the first prison poorhouse to have appointed doctor. So it became a prison, a jail rather. So Bridewell became a jail, the first prison poorhouse to have an appointed doctor. Next is Fleet River. Fleet River is the largest of London's subterranean rivers. Next is the Fleet Street. Fleet Street is a major street mostly in the city of London. So this is how Londons look like. If you are not here yet, then you can go to London if you want to joke. Next is Temple Bar. Temple Bar was the principal ceremonial entrance to the city of London from the city of Westminster. So next is, let's talk about the Ludgate Circus. So Ludgate Circus is a road junction in the city of London where Farringdon Street, Newbridge Street, the A201 crosses Fleet Street or Ludgate Hill. Ludgate Hill is a gentle rise to St. Paul's Cathedral. By 1556, part of it had become a jail known as Bridewell Prison. It was reinvented by lodgings and was closed in 1855 and the buildings demolished in 1863 to 1864. The name Bridewell subsequently became a common name for a jail. So, Bridewell is common for a name of jail. They call it a jail. So, I hope that you learned something from my video. And that would be all. Thank you and God bless us always.